WNST timing around here when we get to talk about things like kids coming to baseball games for free, or my favorite prop here on the WNS TV channel and Facebook channel, the old Ravens PSL 2018 monthly payment plan option form. Marty Conway is the sports business professor of all things good and evil at Georgetown University. He understands it all because he worked for the Baltimore Orioles and Major League Baseball and a whole bunch of other places, including the Texas Rangers. And we've heard of a lot of things, Marty. And, I know we've done 2-for-1 specials. We do fireworks nights. We milk the cow. We give away bobbleheads and beanie babies that are worth $100 the minute you leave the stadium. Kids for free at Major League Baseball. What says you, man? How's life?
It's good. Thank you very much. And what say I is that, kids have always been the heartbeat of baseball. And second thing is that price, with 81 games, price has been, should be, never an impediment to coming to a game. Whether it's dugout days, bargain nights, all these other kind of things, there's always room on the menu for lower price, half price, discounted, deeply discounted, tickets, 2-for-1, things like that. So what they're doing is, I laud them for what they're doing, and I think that...
and we don't laud them much, right? Really. Let's point that out.
What I would say is the unwashed media out there nationally, they thought this was fantastic. Now, you need to look at the details a little bit and see, when is it available, where is it available, for how long, et cetera. And the fact that, look, I think we all here locally know that this is going to be a particularly tough April for them in terms of the lack of advance sales. I think they are quite likely, going to be also acknowledging by doing this that they might have had one of their worst off-season sales that they've had in a few years. I just don't think the marketplace has recognized what or who the Orioles are this year. Even though most of the players are the same, I think that their off-season activity was not that exciting. And as a result, I don't think there's much excitement. And won't be much excitement until the weather warms and there's some sign of what this team will be. So I think that's initially what it is. Look, I think that kids cheer free is, it's like kids eat free. You can go to a lot of restaurants on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and one of their enticements to get some paying adults in is to give the kids a free kids meal or dish like that. So it's in keeping with that, and we'll see where it goes. Look, on one hand, it could run all season, but that would mean that they have a lot of inventory, and that might not be a good thing. So I suspect it will be April and maybe into May, and then maybe it will come back again in September after school's back in session and all that. That'd be my hunch at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot of directions I'm going to go here. By the way, Marty Conway is the good professor of all things sports business at Georgetown University. Also travels the world and sees the world and sort of ran the Orioles for a decade, heading into Camden Yards back into the 80s during the EBW days. And, things have changed, I guess around baseball, and prices have changed. And to your point, it was always, my dad took me to the ballpark for $1 or $2, and he got in for $3.50 once he was a senior citizen or whatever, and we sat in the bleachers. It's who we were. I mean, I didn't grow up with a whole lot, but a love of baseball is something I certainly had back during the area when you were running around Memorial Stadium in a suit and tie and trying to get more people like me interested. Dude, you said something, and I don't want to call you out on this, but I think you and I should have an open, friendly argument on this. Kids have always been the heartbeat of baseball. Really? Really? I mean, I know they say that. You know what I mean? And I know we want to think kids play the game, but I don't think there's ever a point, maybe after your era, since, let's say, the strike, so we're going back 25 years now, I mean, that's a long time, where they have ever thought, kids first. It's all about the kid. I don't think that's ever been the case in anything they've ever thought about in the way that they deal with autographs or in the way they deal with Fan Fest or in the way they deal with ticket pricing or, anything like that. I don't think kids are the heartbeat of baseball, Marty. I think that's an adage, and I think that's something I heard in my childhood and something probably you believed in the 1980s when you came into baseball at that. I don't think that the industry has treated it like that the last 30 years at all.
Well, I didn't say Major League Baseball. I said baseball. Maybe let me clarify what I say by that. And that is, but clearly baseball, in terms of all of its youth programs, everything, there is no sport in this country that has a better pipeline to kids and families than baseball. We don't play youth basketball in the way that we play youth baseball. We don't play. Now I'm talking about when you go across, leave the coast, leave the West Coast, get to the heartland, get to the places like that where lacrosse has not taken off. Football is still important, but kids generally get signed up for Little League Baseball well before they even ask for it, and it's hard to find a kid anymore who didn't play. So when I say kids are the heart of baseball, I really am talking about the game, not just Major League Baseball. Indeed, I will certify what you said, that Major League Baseball clubs at many times, and we can talk about why that is, have foregone kids and families. They've talked the talk, but they haven't walked the walk, because if you look carefully, every time we went from an old stadium to a new stadium, with a few exceptions, you look at what they did was they hollowed out those lower box seats, intended those for corporate luxury. Everything you heard was club seating, PSLs, all sorts of things, and they tried to suffice by saying, well, we've got some places for families up in the upper. But I'm talking about right down the strike zone, and I say this almost every time that we talk. If the NFL had a youth program quite the size and scope of what baseball does and softball for girls, it would be even more popular than it is today. So it really is the pipeline that I'm talking about and how it reaches down into almost every community across the country. I'm segregating that and separating it from Major League Baseball, who I don't think consistently have done a great job. And I think that only since Rob Manfred has been back in the commissioner's chair has there been sort of a renewed emphasis. Now, some of that, too, is if you look at what baseball, and we'll get into this with the Orioles in a second, after Camden Yards came along and all the other stadiums that followed that, there was a clear boom in baseball, and for many places they were sold out consecutively. So they didn't really have to do a lot of family marketing, and only when that snow began to thaw and there were seats available did they return to that. So that's how I would clarify, and I think I'm partially in agreement with you about what Major League Baseball has or hasn't done regarding kids and families. But I'm really talking about the pipeline of baseball that you grew up with in Essex and Dundalk and happens in Catonsville and Arbutus and every other community around here, that volunteers come out and make sure that there's some sort of youth or Little League Baseball in their community for the kids.
He is Marty Conway. He's a sports business professor. You can follow him out on Twitter as well as at LinkedIn, where he does not blog often enough, but when he does, you should read it. Marty, the direction I'm going to take this thing in here, I don't, want to be sort of macabre, but this is not a Peter Angelo's decision to allow kids into games for free. This has got John's name on it. Whispers are all over town. I'm hearing things, as they say down on Pennsylvania Avenue, that, Peter G. Angelos has made his final decision and will not be heard from again in regard to the Orioles. And this plays into how messy the situation is right now with Buck Showalter, with Brady Anderson, with Dan Duquette, with Adam Jones, with Manny Machado, with Zach Britton, with Brad Brock, with all the contracts kind of coming together over the next 5 months. And these things that are happening it doesn't feel like Peter's guiding the ship anymore. But then the question would be, well, who is guiding the ship and who's going to guide the ship? And Peter would have never have done this. And I know this because I was the guy on the radio screaming 15 years ago, dude, place is getting kind of empty down there. You might want to let kids in for $1. That was always my thing. If you go back and look me up, and this is back when they refused to put Baltimore on the jerseys, Marty. This is back when they were still, trying to court the $2 billion that they would siphon off the Washington market, which they've done. But now in the modern era, you see how the team has been run and who's been running them and where the Chris Davis money goes to. This is really a strange time, and I don't think it's forever. But let's be honest. I mean, when owners get ill and when they fall out of being able to have the capability of making decisions, whether it's Pat Bowlen in Denver, when estates take over or children take over, like in Tampa Bay, decisions. Things change. I mean, Rocky Wirtz is I should put a poster of him up here behind me for what he did with the Chicago Blackhawks. I don't know that John Angelos is going to run the team, but clearly from his politics alone after the riots and stuff, he and his father don't agree on much, and I don't know what the level of power would be, but it feels like when they're letting kids in for free, not only does it smack of desperation, as you've pointed out rather nicely in saying ticket sales may have been a little soft in April, and they have challenges. They also have a really tough schedule. They're going to lose a lot of games in April, I believe, especially with the pitching they have. But, if John's going to run the place, this is an interesting changing of the chapter for whatever the last 25, the Peter principles have been. And here comes the next version, the New Testament of what the Orioles need to become, because I don't know if they've bottomed out, Marty, but letting kids in for free, boy, oh boy, oh boy. I mean, I don't, say bottomed out, but doesn't get much, you can't do much more than free at this point. I mean, the Cubs aren't doing that. The Dodgers aren't doing that. Red Sox aren't doing that. Yankees aren't doing that. Nor do they want to do that. The Nationals don't want to do that either.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, anytime you do a program, whether it's, free, 2-for-1, you have all these different, machinations of how it's done. There is a little bit of complexity here, and that is, how do it's like, you never want to be I never wanted to be in the position of, bring such and such to the ballpark, we'll collect it, and you'll get it free. We don't want to be accepting cans and giving people tickets, right, or doing things like that. The same thing applies here at the box office, and that is, well, is that kid 9? Is that kid 11? Is that kid, so you just, you have to put some parameters around things, just because on the off chance, the 1 in 100 chance that you win 21 in a row and you suddenly have, people coming out, that you have some way to prove and that you can analyze. The other thing is, let me just be straight with you about free tickets and all that. If you can give away in Major League Baseball as many free tickets as you want, but you're going to pay the visiting team their share, Major League Baseball their share, all the people that are a part of the sharing that goes on with revenue sharing, you're going to pay them a certain amount of money. They're not just going to say, well, you had, 8,000 tickets for free, and so you don't owe us any revenue share on that money. I don't want to say what it is now because I'm not absolutely sure, but when I was working in baseball, there was a set determined amount that was no lower than in terms of what you were going to pay on the share. So that's why I think just be careful about where this program goes, or any program like this goes. There will be a limit, because the team will have to pay its visitors and Major League Baseball a share of every person that's in that ballpark, whether they came in for free or they paid, a full price. In terms of running it, I tend to generally get the sense that I agree with where you're going. I've heard from other folks in town that there is a shift in that regard. I don't know that the shift goes all the way to the baseball side of the house. I do clearly feel that on the business side, and when we say running things, my sense is that there's no longer the need or the ability maybe to get permission on some of these things that used to be decided at Peter's office.
Well, everything was decided at Peter's office in regard to corporate sales, suite sales, who was buying, who was sitting where, what color the walls were. I mean, the stories are legend. I mean, they're jaw-dropping, in the modern era. Really, they are.
There would be executives, including the general manager, all the way on down, going to his office and waiting, having a 10 a.m. appointment and waiting an hour, waiting 45 minutes out in the anteroom while, he finished his other legal business. And then, you'd have general managers and VPs and all that going and waiting and spending the better part of the day, waiting to see him and then make the decision. So that part of it may no longer be relevant.
You're telling me stuff I didn't even have in the Peter principles that I should have added. I'm going to go back and amend that, Marty.
And so I think maybe also the speed of the decision, something like this kids program could be decided upon and executed within a week because they can get all the materials and all that. In the past, that wasn't possible to do. So I think the speed of the decisions are changing, but we'll see. I mean, you just saw, unfortunately, the New Orleans Saints go through this. They lost their primary owner. It appears after a lot of different family squabbles that his third wife is likely to get the team and run the team. So anything can happen in that regard. God forbid.
Well, Jack Kent Cook is another, case study right down the street, right? As to what could happen. It will be very interesting because their fate, whatever it is if a new brand came in with a Cal Ripken, Brooks Robinson, Under Armour-y or McCormick-y, or I'm making stuff up here, a brand that's good locally, whatever that would be, some Steve Jeppy type that takes it over, that loves the team, I don't know, maybe. I mean, Tom Clancy didn't live long enough. He would have been sort of the good king had he run the place and loved baseball and all that stuff. I do sort of pray for them a little bit, to steal Steve Bisciotti's notion here. And on that segue, Marty Conway is our guest here. He is the sports professor of all things business down at Georgetown University, a long-time Orioles front office employee, as well as Major League Baseball and the Texas Rangers. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Howard Bank, a relentless commitment to being the best at everything they do. Branches now throughout Baltimore and Maryland. Stop by and see what they do. They're sponsoring our Be More Positive community and charity series that begins on April the 5th. On Thursdays, we're going to bring in some charities and talk to them about the community and things going on in the world. And on that vein, we're also going to be at a Michael's Cafe next Thursday night with head coach Barry Trotz of the Washington Capitals. We will be swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry, along with There Goes My Hero. First event we've ever done at Michael's Cafe. I would encourage everyone to come out, rock the red. It is opening day for you baseball types out there. Of course, I'll be at opening day. I'll be the guy who's sober in the 7th inning and leaving to go do the Barry Trotz interview in Timonium at Michael's Cafe. We'll also be there courtesy of our friends at Freedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need Freedmont's education online. Carl Delmont will be here a little later on in the week to talk about this and other things, as well as his involvement with us with There Goes My Hero. We'll be swabbing on their behalf as well next Thursday night. Marty Conway's our guest. Marty, I want to go from baseball to football, but sort of blend this thing in to say, are you a little worried about sports in Baltimore right now? I am. I thought the UMBC thing was wonderful. They got a big gym over there that, tickets are cheap and, easy to get to and like all that stuff. They might sell some tickets, but when I start to look at the brands here and see who's in ascent and who's in decline, I'm having a hard time finding the brands in ascent right now.
Yeah, I do think that there's a combined inertia backward right now, which is unusual because generally when one of the two, major league programs in town is struggling, the other team feeds off that and tends to seemingly benefit from that.
Like a balance beam, you think? I mean, like in a literal sense?
Yeah, I think there's a question. Look, I think the other thing is, too, let's be honest. We've talked about this probably every time or every other time I come on your show. The changing in consumer behaviors with regard to, A, attending live events, and B, how you purchase your tickets and how you get them and what you do, et cetera, are changing at the same time. And I have never seen a circumstance since I've been in this area where I think it's affected both clubs, both organizations at the same time. And that is, I'm increasingly unsure that either organization has a real solid handle on that. I think both of them have looked at winning, have looked at, fan experience. They've looked at some different things like that and always tended to feed that. That's their natural instinct. But I think what's going on that they don't typically see, which is how people, especially younger fans, are choosing to make decisions, what they want to go to, how much they want to pay, how long they want to spend, and all of that. And it's very clear that the audience for live sports in Baltimore is more dynamic than it ever been before. And I think that both organizations have had more of a static approach to it, which is we'll make some small incremental changes. And I don't think that's going to work for the long term. In football in particular, once you get a crack in that, we're all sold out sort of mentality, you can unwind that pretty rapidly. And I think you saw that. I know you've talked about it in December, where not just 5,000 seats, but 15,000 seats or whatever those final numbers were. I mean, significant swaths of tickets where they were purchased at some point, whether in the spring, summer, or early fall, and people chose not to attend, regardless of how big the video boards are, regardless of how big and how exciting Ravens Walk is. And yes, it's opponent. Yes, it's weather. It's all these things. But I think that there's a move there that hasn't been made. And I know just from talking to other contacts in town that they have lost some other things in the region in terms of media, partnerships, and sponsorships that they've not faced before. And I think this is a very interesting time. The number of PSLs is going up that's for sale. The price of those PSLs is going down. And I think that's an indication that the current mantra may not be something that they'll be able to withstand without some substantial change. And I don't mean incremental change, but some sort of substantial change in the near future.
Well, I think it's always difficult in any industry when the paradigm shifts, right? And the newspapers would be the greatest example of that, where we're just going to keep putting out newspapers. And, me being in the radio business to say, well, we're not going to pay attention to those message boards, you know what I mean? We're in the radio business here. All that's gotten very convoluted over, the course of this part of the century for sure. And to your point, how tickets are purchased in the market and how easy it is to sell them or not go, or and how easy it was for people to just forget they even had them last year after they paid for them. That's a weird thing for me. I'm still having trouble getting over the fact that all over my Facebook, people couldn't give their tickets away last year, and I'm trying to figure out how that's going to feel different 6 months from now. Whether there's going to be some romanticism around the Ray Lewis Hall of Fame thing, whether they're going to draft a wide receiver that's going to get everyone excited, which I don't think is going to happen. Certainly their free agency wasn't going to get anybody excited. And, they're doing things on a marketing level, Marty, and I don't know, have you seen the Community Impact Guide? Have you seen me hold this up on the camera? This is what they've sent me. They've sent me 6 of them, incidentally, so I have a whole bunch of them here. And it's this romantic matte finish, play 60, a lot of flag, a lot of America, a lot of community, a lot of black, a lot of white, a lot of special needs, a lot of military, a lot of military going on. And I think they believe this is going to help them get people back. I know they've been on the phone with people saying, pretty please, but I don't think they're going to apologize for the players taking a knee. And I think that there's something about that I smell, being a Dundalk guy and having done this my whole life around here with the Orioles, that I smelled with the Orioles, which was a little smell of smelling themselves. And the arrogance around Angelos became something that became, for a lot of people, I just don't want to do it. And I hear that about the Ravens, from moving Westminster to fan experience with players. I mean, I go to these Oriole fan fests now, and it feels like you're a cow and you're being moved through these things when you do the audit. And for me, I wouldn't have any part of it. I mean, if I owned the team, there'd have to be a better, different way to do it than the way it's been done. And I think the turnoff of the fans to say, well, the people I tailgate with, they don't go anymore. The people I used to sit with don't go anymore. I'm 25 years older than I was. I'm now 5 years older and moving on from one Super Bowl, almost 2 decades out on the other Super Bowl. I think staying at home on the couch has become the greater enemy of all of it. And I don't know that it's even ticket price, right? So as much as baseball's like, come on in for free, we'll let the kids in for free, it wasn't price with the Ravens tickets last year. It's cold and I don't want to go. Same as it was for the Orioles when things went bad. It wasn't $5 night or Ollie's night or any of that. It's just I don't want to go, and not wanting to go is really, I guess, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference, right?
Yeah, I think so. You made a couple of good points in there, and I would respond to a couple of them. Number one, I've said this before. I would be on the record and being consistent. I think that the Ravens as an organization do several things extremely well. I think that their community relations program is really strong. I think it's something that, they do. They pour millions of dollars into the community every year, whether it's in those kind of programs that you were holding up and mentioning. I think that their digital media programs I know they are some of the best in the NFL. Other teams look at the Ravens and say, how are you doing it, so well? And you're modeling your programming and different things. Now, I think there's some other areas that we can talk about now, or some other times where I think they have stepped back or they haven't moved fast enough. And typically, so you were referencing newspapers, and I lived through that when I was at AOL, and we were trying to bury newspapers, frankly. And that is, what happened was, as their industry struggled, they tried to make minor changes, right? We'll do fewer pages. We'll do thinner paper. We'll do these kinds of things. So they were just nibbling around the edges, when the fact of the matter is they really needed, like you said, to jump into the message boards, to jump into those other areas and do what Amazon did, right? Which is Amazon would go out and buy their competitors and figure out ways to integrate that into the business that they had. And I think the struggle for the Ravens, frankly, number one is, and I heard John Eisenberg on your show recently talk about that the money still continues to roll in for Thursday night football and Sunday night and all this. And that's absolutely true. There's no question that on a national level, as the audience for television disappears, the audience for football is one that networks are grabbing onto, hoping that that saves them for a little bit longer. Well, at the end of the day, the NFL is really good at making their league a television show. And if you look at television shows, the cameras focus on them. You don't look at the audience. Well, they often have to let the audience in for free. Why? Because they need somebody there to cheer. They need to make it seem like there's life in there. And so I think on one hand, the NFL, yes, they're going to do well. They're going to send their teams checks for $250 million a year for the next several years. But it's in that local revenue where they're starting to struggle. And I think that the paradigm shift in Baltimore has been on. Look, it's a security issue, right? Johns Hopkins has said they want to have their own police force. There's issues all the way around, and people have looked at this combination and said, I'm just not as motivated and interested anymore. And I don't think the Ravens have done. Here's an area where I do think that they've stepped back, and that is when they left Westminster of weeks of training camp and tried to substitute 3 open practices, which were fine, and they drew 30,000 people to that. But they need to be in business every day of the year, right? And I've said this before. You can go visit Jerry Jones and the Cowboys every day of the year, and you can see activity. You can see them train. You can see them lift weights. You can see Jerry in his fishbowl office or whatever you want to see. That is the way that the Packers and the Cowboys and other franchises that I think are sustainingly successful in the NFL have gone. I think the idea of trying to sell you 8 or 10 games and giving you a great fan experience, those are table stakes in gambling. Like, that's what you have to do. The question is, what else are you willing to do? And I think that they have foregone that, and that is where some of this, in terms of the people that I talk to in the community, including sponsors, have said, we just can't monetize it anymore. Like, we've done all that we can do, and now we have to look at, other programs. And so I think that has had a pretty big impact. And I think that when they've made changes on their business side, they've been small and incremental changes while the consumer base is switching at a rapid pace. And if you don't keep up with that, you literally are running a 9-minute mile when the consumers are running a 7-minute mile. And at some point you look up and you go, geez, I'm 30 minutes behind. What's happened? Well, you lost 2 minutes a mile, and suddenly you are where you are. So I think that's a combination. I think the Orioles went through that, have gone through that as well. It's
well, the Orioles completely regrew their thing during your era, right? So, like, during your era, it was guys like me from Middle River coming out there for tankard night, and 4 years later, George Will sitting behind home plate, and all of Washington's in, and then Angelos came in and just screwed it all up. I mean, systematically, from a sponsorship standpoint, especially the way you and your brethren sold baseball to Rockville and Reston and D.C. when that and the Potomac Rim that really funneled a lot of money into Camden Yards for a decade that really went away after the first decade of skyboxes, right?
Yeah, there were 2 things. Number one, there was a designated hitter program which brought in corporate folks who were literally part of the organization, and that spread. That was one way to do it. Also, look, the ownership group, Ed Williams didn't do this very much, but Larry Lucchino was considered kind of the owner. And Larry mixed and mingled with everybody from the corporate sect. And so those are people who felt like they had a connection to the team. The other thing they did is after I left and went to Texas, we had 5 or 6 whatever years of consecutive sellouts here. They stopped or really limited the giveaway programs. They no longer did them on weekends because they said, well, we're sold out. They did them on Thursday night. I saw that right away, and I said, that's a bad idea because at some point you're going to stop being sold out, and then you're going to have to try to regenerate all that energy again. And you can see that that's part of what happened was people stopped coming for the free events because they stopped giving them on weekends. And then once the team and the stadium was no longer something new, it was like, where'd all those people go? How do I get them back? Like I said, they've moved on. Their habits have changed. And so that's one of the dangerous things. And so the relationship on an ongoing basis with corporate leaders and what's shifting. And again, the business market, you know this, you're out there all the time. The business market, the corporate market in the Baltimore area has gone through a radical shift, and city administrations, all sorts of other things.
Police, let's throw that in there too, because that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, and that has an impact on people. And again, and then it comes down to, well, not only do you have to win, you have to win championships, right? You can't just win 10 games because it may not be enough. I think that, what were they last year, 9-7? And you'd say, well, maybe that's a pretty good season. Well, you know, I know Ozzie has said many times, I've seen him in press conferences, he thinks that winning will bring it back. Well, look,
you can't win much more than 9, right?
Yeah,
you can lose a whole lot more than 9.
Right. What's the difference between winning 9 and 11? I don't know, but it's how you win and all that. And so I think it's way more than that. And again, if you talk to other people in the community, and I think the Ravens have too, but the question is, have they talked to enough people? Do they talk to them often enough? Or are they only talking to them when they need something? And in this case, maybe that's what people have seen as well. But I do think that for both teams, they're going to go through a real shift this year, and it will be interesting to see if both of the clubs suffer this at the same time. And if they do, it's because I just think they're missing the consumer behavior issue and not really being willing to run as fast as the consumer is running.
This segment of our WNST Intelligent Programming with Marty Conway brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast, a tasty coffee. I've got the Kona Blend right now in my Cole Roofing mug here on the WNSTV channel. Download that app. Make sure you're using that, scoring the points. I had a little Western fries and chicken breast and a wing. My wife and I fought over the second breast from the Light Street. Formerly Berks, where all great sports writers used to meet. Marty, last thing for you here before I let you go, because I feel bad that we're 30 minutes into this chat and I haven't said UMBC. Look, that's going to be its own story. The next time we get together, maybe we go further in on that. But look, you're an official. I mean, you blow a whistle for a living. You run around and see underdogs and favorites, and you see the blood, the sweat, and the tears of athletes, boys, girls of all ages. The UMBC story, that's kind of like why we're fans, right? It's like why we watch this stuff at this point, right?
Yeah, I think that my mantra has always been about the NCAA tournament has been 64 teams, 64 stories. It's increasingly less about what I call the 94 by 50, the court size, the 94 by 50. It's increasingly less about the 94 by 50 and more about the stories that go along with it. And that's why, ultimately, the response and the reception to the NCAA tournament on television and streaming has been completely inverse to what's going on with almost every other sport. While the NFL is losing 8 or 9 or 10% a year in viewership, the NCAA tournament is increasing in 2 areas. Number one, it's increasing and at least holding its ground in terms of television, and it's incredibly growing in terms of streaming. It's the one program nationally that has figured it out that if we do the right balance of offering people not just, and it's free. It's not like you have to pay additional for your streaming service. It's a combination of giving consumers what they want, knowing that over time people are going to shift from television to streaming media, and that if you get that right, if you get that balance right, you can sell sponsorships, you can sell media to it without forcing it and saying, well, you have to pay $9.95 for this, or you have to sit and wait for commercials on this. They've just treated consumers like they are and said, let them choose. If they would like to watch the telecast, we've got 4 or 5 of those running a night. If you'd like to watch streaming, log in and you can watch any game at any time.
Marty, I got to tell you, man, I had a really packed weekend, right? I did a Kidney Foundation thing Thursday. I did a Be More Humane thing Saturday night. And so I was out, right? And I was at a place where I was at Judas Priest on Sunday night at Anthem, D.C., and the Wi-Fi in there is fantastic, right? It's all built down on the wharf, but there's no sports bar there, right? I mean, it's about the music. That's not why Seth didn't build it for you to come in and watch the basketball game, you know what I mean? And my mobile device was the outlet. After the Caps game, I had a charity turn with Barry Trotz. I was down underneath the Verizon Center as the game started. The game was on underneath. I saw Craig Laughlin, had a cocktail, and next thing you know, we're in the car on New York Avenue, And my wife's got the game on her phone as I'm driving on New York Avenue, and we watched the game, literally pulled over to celebrate a little bit because I wanted to watch the celebration. And it was a 20-point game, so there was nothing like all that much to see the last 5 minutes. But I can't imagine what my experience would have been, and I don't know that I would have found it on the radio in D.C., that particular. I probably would have because of Virginia, right? But I didn't look for it on the radio. My wife had it on a mobile device, right? So that 5 years ago, that would have been unfathomable, right? I mean, you wouldn't have thought that was possible.
Yeah, and most of the media organizations were making it way more complicated than they need to. You either had to authenticate when you went in, what's my cable subscription, all that, or you had to pay some sort of fee, even if it was a nominal fee. All those things turned people off. And like I said, I give credit to CBS, Turner, and the NCAA for doing it properly, which is putting it on free, making it available anywhere, and letting the audience choose, because ultimately that's what they've done. And so Friday night's UMBC game, number one, nearly set a record for the most people that have watched a Friday night in that window, the first weekend window. They had over 3.5 million people on television, and they had consecutive streams, meaning that people concurrently streaming, somewhere in the 1 to 1.5 million people constantly doing it. So you put those two things together, and you have, 4.5, maybe 5 million people, and on a variety of things. And like you said, maybe you mix in the radio, there's some other people listening on that. That's the approach. That's the model going forward. That's what you're going to see from the Masters upcoming in April, where you can tune in and watch, but you can also see it on streaming. That's the approach. Back locally, you look at what's happening with those baseball and football teams. Is it easy for you to watch on television? Yes, I can do that. Is it easy for you to stream? Well, in the case of the NFL, not really yet. In the case of the Orioles, I can't stream it, right? So, when you look at...
Even though I'm paying for it, right? Like, literally.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So when you look at, appealing to the audience, doing it properly, those are the kind of things that they're going to have to do because that's where the audience is. And if you want to look at kids free and all these other kind of things, those are nice, but that's really not where the mainstream consumer goes. And if you want to sell tickets and get people interested, that's the kind of approach that you have to have first and foremost, and not finding ways and barriers and protecting other investments and all that. You have to allow the consumer to choose, and then you have to follow where they are and figure out a way to put a business plan around that.
He is Marty Conway. You can follow him out on Twitter as well as on LinkedIn. He is everywhere sports businesses, including down at Georgetown as a professor of sports business. Dude, I've kept you captive and hostage here long enough, and we haven't even talked about UMBC and the fallout for the university and for Freeman Hrabowski. Yeah, obviously the coaching situation. Next time we get together in a couple weeks, we'll discuss the fallout of that, because I am fascinated by what it means for a university, right, to have UMBC on it and to do what they did. What will it mean over the next 5 or 10 years for them? That's part two. That's the 201 edition. Marty, love you. Appreciate you, man. We'll see you soon.
Okay, bud. Thank you.
You got it. Marty Conway, professor of sports business down there at Georgetown, also traveling over to Qatar and running the Orioles a couple decades ago, and one of my favorite people to talk about the business of sports, especially on the eve of opening day after the UMBC thing, while I've got monthly plan options and community impacts and all sorts of things here to consider. The Ravens are getting my money, but, are they getting yours? I guess that's the story. And will be the story in the coming days and weeks and months around here as we get ready for the draft. I want to remind everybody, head coach Barry Trotz of the Washington Capitals will be joining us in Timonium. Yes, Baltimore County. Come on out. Michael's Cafe. We're calling it opening day, but after opening day. Sort of the opening day after party. Yeah, I'm going to call it that. I'm going to write that down. That's at Michael's Cafe in Timonium. We'll be swabbing for the bone marrow registry. For There Goes My Hero and leukemia patients everywhere. By the way, it is, as we are recording here today on the snowstorm, the 4-year anniversary of my wife's survival. So if I had my little applause thing like I had in the old place, I would play it. But so we're celebrating that this week. We're going to be in Florida all next week, broadcasting from the NFL owners' meetings in Orlando. Luke's going to be holding down the homestead around here. And, of course, on opening day, we will be buzzing about and having fun as we always do. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. The buyatoyota.com audio vault always finds anything you miss around here. You want to hear some UMBC stuff, certainly some March Madness, getting ready for Ravens and trying to get the fallout of the Crabtree signing as well. and going to the owners' meetings next week to look into more details as well. You can find us out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. You can listen live from anywhere in the world, including Orlando. Might be a little Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck for me next week before it's all over with. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNS TV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.